My name is Hawkins. I'm a fourth year student at UBC studying sociology, and I will be the moderator for this debate. Before we get started, I just want a quick show of hands. How many of you are unfamiliar with the Zeitgeist movement? Alright, so we got a few of you there. How many of you have never heard of Anarcho-Capitalism? Alright, still some of you here, so we got some awareness, excellent. Finally, who here feels they have a perfect understanding of both the Zeitgeist movement and anarcho-capitalism? Because I have some questions for you. Alright, this debate was organized for three reasons. To stimulate discussion about and between the two ideological camps represented today, namely the resource-based economy advocates and free market anarchists. Second, as much as I enjoy watching the webinar discussions, I think it's real-life, in-person dialogues between New Age thinkers. You know, we have to step away from the computer sometimes for quality face-to-face interaction with other community members who are actually awake and eager to bounce ideas off each other. Finally, this debate was organized to specify the stark differences between these two ideological camps, but just as importantly, and in my opinion maybe a bit more importantly, what they share in common. I hope that by highlighting some of these similarities, groups like the Zeitgeist movement and anarchists of all varieties might be able to figure out a way to work together towards a brighter future. But hey, I might be dreaming, so let's find out. Before I introduce the speakers, let me inform you about the debate format. We'll start off with both speakers delivering 15-minute opening statements, clarifying their position. This will be followed by a 5-minute response from each. I will then ask the speakers some of my own questions and allow for some back and forth open discussion between the two. That should last about an hour, at which point we will have a 10-minute intermission. You can go stretch your legs, use the washroom facilities, etc. After that, we'll have an audience Q&A period. So if you have any unanswered questions, please be sure to stick around until after the intermission. You'll have the opportunity to line up at the bottom of the stairs and address your question to one or both of the speakers. Finally, we'll finish off with some closing remarks from the speakers. Now, before we get going, just some ground rules. Disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. We actually have some members in the audience who will ask you to leave if there's reason to. No grandstanding. In the final question period, questions lasting more than 45 seconds will be cut off. I have a short attention span, so. And final, oh, you know what? I forgot about one. This has to be rule number one. Don't talk about Fight Club. Alright, now let me introduce our two speakers today. Matt Berkowitz is a coordinator of the Vancouver chapter of the global sustainability advocacy organization called the Zeitgeist Movement. He holds a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of British Columbia. And since joining the Zeitgeist Movement, he has become the main media spokesperson and has appeared on local radio stations such as CFOX 99.3, CKNW, and CBC. He's also been on national television such as CTV and CBC. Matt has lectured extensively about subject matter pertaining to the movement, spanning from monetary economics to sociology. Hey, please, sociology. Oh. Victor Cross is a professional Vancouver artist born and raised in Toronto. I'm from Toronto. He is a lifelong student of popular culture and philosophy, having studied under Professor John Ridpath in the class Intellectual History at York University. He's widely known for his extreme caricaturing and imaginative artworks. His book, Icons and Idols, Pop the Culture, contains over 80 drawings and paintings magnificently showcasing his unique vision and insight into popular culture and the human condition. As Canada's premier caricaturist, Victor has rendered numerous international celebrities and Canadian media personalities for commercial and private purposes. His past Toronto Gallery art showings were widely popular and were covered by both print and televised media. Currently, his artwork is the subject of a documentary called Pop Goes the Culture. And now, without further delay, Matt Berkowitz, please start us off with your opening statements when you're ready.
First of all, thank you to Pavil for inviting me to speak and for being the central planner for this event. I want to preface by saying I don't really wish to treat this as a typical debate, but rather a discussion. A debate is often simply concerned with winning, whereas I hope we can try to share ideas and learn from one another. With that said, I hope that everything both of us say today is scrutinized with a critical eye, and that the ideas that best conform to the title of this debate are what will be embraced. I want to start with a metaphorical story I heard from another Zeitgeist Vancouver Coordinator. Imagine a population of 10 people entering a room and locking it behind them. These are people of various ages, strengths, intelligence, and other characteristics. And there's enough food and water to sustain them all for 1 month. The 10 people then decide to play the following game. They must all stay in the locked room for 2 weeks. In the beginning, everyone gets enough food and water for 1 day, except for 2 people who get the rest. Every day they must all play games against each other, games of physical strength, intelligence, and luck. The winners of these games get more food and water than the losers of these games. After playing this game for a few days, some of the people will begin to run out of food and water, which will in turn make them even weaker in the games. After about a week, the first ones will die of dehydration, even though there is more than enough food and water in the room. None of the players commits any physical violence or aggression to the starving ones. They just don't deserve to live anymore, according to the rules of the game. After 2 weeks, about 5 of the players will have died, 3 will be starving, 1 will be doing okay, and 1 will have huge amounts of food and water. Everyone in the game performed only non-aggressive, voluntary, peaceful interactions with the others, and yet 5 of them died, unnecessarily, even though there was more than enough food and water in the room. So what killed them? It wasn't scarcity, it wasn't individual aggression or coercion, it wasn't any government with a monopoly on force. It was the rules of the game they played, also known as their economic system, that killed them. And since the 10 people in the beginning decided to play by those rules, it was their choice of economic system that caused the systemic violence against 8 of them, killing 5, and causing suffering for 3. Had they decided to play by different rules instead, they could have all lived in abundance, non-aggression, and voluntarism for the entire 2 weeks. We're all in this room together, which is our planet. Currently, no one can leave, which is not the fault of any government, but simply a limitation of our current technology and natural laws. There is more than enough of what we all need to live a happy life in this room, and we are all indeed of different ages, genders, strengths, intelligence, and luck. So if we decide to play the economic game by rules that invariably cause unnecessary suffering and death for many of us, then it is our choice of rules that is violent, aggressive, and coercive. If we, however, decide to play by rules that do not lead to such systemic violence and coercion, then we'll have the opportunity to truly live non-aggressively but voluntarily. Take responsibility for the games and the rules you choose and for the systemic consequences. Now, I want to discuss the benchmark I'll be using to explain my position, that being the natural order of reality, or more specifically, science, which is the best method we have discovered for approximating our physical reality, such that our predictions from these inferred scientific principles is continually advancing. The scientific method itself is a body of techniques for investigating physical phenomena, acquiring new knowledge, and the self-correction of previously ascertained knowledge. Thus, our ideas of truth are constantly evolving as we develop better and better models to fit our ever-growing body of knowledge and understanding. Just as the science of medicine should be geared towards maximizing public health, the science of economics should be geared towards maximizing the quality of living of every human on Earth while ensuring the protection of the environment, including plant and animal well-being. So what social system will best serve humankind? In other words, if our goal as a species is to survive in the most optimized, healthy way, the basis for this socioeconomic model needs to be as life-supportive and therefore maximally sustainable for human life as possible, taking into account the material needs of all people on the planet. The scientific method appears to be the best approach we can utilize to answer this question, and to do so, we're going to need to take a big step back and widen our perspective beyond many of the presuppositions made in modern economic thought, something I'll expand on more very shortly. Before I do that, let's examine some of the built-in attributes of our present economic model. And by our present economic model, I mean the market system of monetary exchange, whereby goods and services are sold in a marketplace for some non-monetary value, where the seller's goal is the maximization of profit. This is the system that, to one degree or another, is in place more or less in every country in the world. I'm not focusing on the degree of state intervention or anything as such, but rather the entire premise of the so-called free market. To quote David Suzuki, this sort of conventional economics is a form of brain damage. Intrinsic to the profit-maximizing goal of the monetary market system is the need for consumption, and the more of it, the better the economy. It's built right in structurally. If you look up the root of the word economy, it stems from Greek, meaning management of a household, with an emphasis on preserving one's environmental support. By this definition, we currently live in an anti-economic system, far decoupled from any natural world or scientific reference. And to quote Kenneth Bolden, anyone who believes in indefinite growth in anything physical on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist. Here are some more attributes in which the market system of monetary exchange is predicated on, again, regardless of the degree of state intervention. Cost efficiency. In order to maximize profits, all companies need to adhere to this market principle, which simply refers to the strategy of lowering one's input costs to maximize return. This produces inferior, cheap goods inherently, for no goods could ever be produced at what could be termed peak technical efficiency. In fact, cost efficiency is actually inverse to technical efficiency. It also produces strategies of planned and intrinsic obsolescence, commonplace strategies of all goods producing companies in existence today. Competition. From companies competing against one another for market share to people needing to compete against one another for labor, empirical data now shows that this competition poisons every part of our society, both environmentally and psychologically. Competition is an assumed ingredient of market theory, both in terms of human behavior and on a macro level industrial efficiency as a whole. On both accounts, these are highly flawed assumptions. From the countless psychological problems induced by competition to the social stratification inherent in the competitive market, this is a provably destructive mechanism to have governing society. And there's the priority of scarcity. Very simply, the more scarce something is, the more you can charge for it. This creates a perverse reinforcement to maintain artificial scarcities of life-supporting goods and services for the sake of monetary gain, generating countless social distortions. And the last I'll touch on, although there are many more, is labor for income. In a coercive system where most people need to earn money through employment to purchase goods and services, there is an inherent clash of motives. On one hand, to utilize the highest forms of technology to maximize industrial efficiency, and the other to maintain employment. This is often termed the contradiction of capitalism. Notwithstanding the inefficiency this promotes, it also promotes a waste of human life to engage in activities that have no direct social contribution, but instead only exist to perpetuate the flow of money and the employment that is required to do so. Not to mention the neuroses created by the detached self-interest mentality that is reinforced in the pursuit to compete for labor. Now, let's focus on the framework for what would comprise a scientific approach to economics and society as a whole. When we take the known laws of nature, both on human and habitat levels, you start to calculate what our options and possibilities are, technically, without reference to classical and historical assumptions on economic thought, a completely different train of thought emerges. If you wish to orient our society towards maximizing human well-being to the highest level that's technically possible, an entirely different socioeconomic landscape emerges. Following our goal of peak efficiency and thus peak sustainability, some important strategies emerge that we must follow. Since we need planetary resources to survive, we must pay attention to the dynamic equilibrium inherent in natural law. We need to locate and identify all planetary resources we can, as well as implement a system to track usage of these resources in order to remain sustainable. We would also need to account for rates of regeneration in order to ensure equilibrium. Given that resources are not uniformly distributed across the planet, we need to implement some sort of approach that accounts for this variance in different geographical areas all over the Earth. Systems theory works for this, which recognizes that nature is one huge, synergistically connected system and thus treats it as such, rather than an array of countries all competing against one another for monetary economic dominance. So, taking all this inventory and tracking data within a systems theory approach, logic would dictate that we create a global resource management system to manage it. This system would essentially be a repository of all resource-related data, their availability, their usage, their rates of renewability, along with foreshadowing external trends which may affect these variables. It is a repository of data. It does not control people or the economy. With that understood, we then must look at the component parts of management, specifically production and distribution. In considering production, we would need to employ a number of strategies to conform with our goal of maximizing efficiency and sustainability. The most obvious would be that of preservation. We need to make the most diligent use of our finite planetary resources, minimizing waste as much as technically possible in order to ensure peak sustainability. Without the opposing force of the priority of profit, which demands consumption at the highest level possible, this strategy will not be inhibited, rather it will actually be the underlying framework. Another component of production will be to ensure the protection of the environment at all levels. It makes more sense on this level to utilize resources and technologies which have the lowest negative outputs on the environment as technically possible. We can call this the safety or environmental protection strategy. And lastly, without the need to adhere to the waste-producing strategy of cost efficiency like today, we would likely follow three principles when it comes to the creation of products. One, every good must be designed to last as long as possible. Two, when things do break down or are simply no longer usable, we must reuse and recycle as many of the component parts as technically possible. This means product design must incorporate this consideration at the earliest stages. And three, technologies that accelerate very quickly and are prone to obsolescence must be designed to foreshadow and accommodate new technological breakthroughs. As for distribution, we need a proximity strategy at the forefront, which seeks to localize and decentralize production as much as possible in order to save energy on transportation. Furthermore, in order to keep track of distribution of all goods globally and ensure that demand is met, we must implement a demand and distribution tracking system. This would mirror an inventory system in a big corporate chain today. Instead, it would be scaled out globally. In order to keep track of the ever-fluctuating demand requirements, real-time consumption feedback data will be continually communicated via these integrated systems. Advanced survey systems could be used as another method and allow people to communicate new demands that may not yet be available. Rather than money and pricing acting as the data that communicates people's demand, resources themselves act as the data, ensuring a much more empirical measure. Insofar as actually physically obtaining the goods, distribution centers could be scattered around proportionally to population densities. A person could come in, take the good for use, and return it if applicable. And where practical, personalized transport could be arranged to people's homes. The global resource management system and production and distribution systems would be unified together, creating one synergistic, dynamic, updating, global economic management system which could legitimately be labeled a scientific approach to economics. This empirical, ground-up approach to economic management, all of which is a purely technical process, would be able to provide something to the entire human population never before seen, something that would alleviate a great majority of the social problems caused by our current unscientific economic model. That is, access abundance, bypassing the need for trade or private property. If you have free access to what you need and want, there is no basis for trading or property anymore. It is a truly voluntary system, where life-supporting understandings are aimed to be met through the most optimized applications of science and technology, with the goal of maximizing efficiency and sustainability on the entire planet. No need for money, business, politics, or government. The entire premise of the monetary market model is outgrown due to what our current scientific and technological capacities allow us. Money and the market were invented to facilitate a need when that need was relevant. Today it is no longer so. It is time for the next phase of social evolution, which reflects current understandings. This system, as I briefly described, can be termed a resource-based or a natural law economy. It seeks to create a voluntary environment with the conditions that bring out the best of human behavior. Now, there are a number of other issues I could touch on to show how this train of thought can be extrapolated or applied to other areas of society. But due to time, I'll pause here and undoubtedly deal with the myriad of issues that arise when describing this new socioeconomic train of thought. Let me finish by saying that the integrity of any economic model is best measured by how closely aligned its structure and functionality are to the governing laws of nature. A resource-based economy thus recognizes this and thus continually adapts itself to the accumulation of empirical knowledge and our most advanced technical capacities. It is not enough to have a moral philosophy at our social core. The resource-based economy thus is a technical framework that has a direct physical reference to this scientific benchmark. And if I may end with a quote by Dr. Ralph Linton, "The tremendous and still accelerating development of science and technology has not been accompanied by an equal development in social, economic, and political patterns. It is safe to predict that such social inventions as modern-type capitalism, fascism, and communism will be regarded as primitive experiments directed towards the adjustment of modern society to modern methods." Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And now, Victor, to give his opening statements.
I do want to thank Pat for organizing this event, and thanks for Matt to participate. All right, I'm the dinosaur here, the paper waster, old school. So, defending both anarchism and capitalism is a challenging task in today's philosophical climate, which fails to understand either in any significant way. And much worse than anarchism, people have all but lost the knowledge of what capitalism is and what it's achieved. The truth about capitalism's nature and the history has been drowned in a wave of distortion, falsification, aggressive ignorance. Almost everyone takes it as an axiom that capitalism results in the exploitation of the poor, that it leads to monopolies, that it necessitates depressions, that it starts wars, generates inequality by allowing some people to be wealthier than others, thereby threatening social solidarity, that it alienates people from one another, to use Karl Marx's term, and that it exploits the natural resources or despoils nature, and that it impoverishes third world countries, and that it dehumanizes people because of the profit motive, where it reduces human beings to objectified dollar and cent calculations. So the popular consensus is that capitalism might be necessary to deliver the goods, but it fails on ethical grounds. By contrast, socialism, while perhaps not practical, is considered to be morally superior if only human nature could live up to its ideals. We've heard this before. It's looks good on paper, but not practical. It's not practical. But we hold it up as a moral ideal. Now I understand that the Zeitgeist advocates balk at the proposal of the RBE model, resource-based economy for the uninitiated, as being compared to socialism. I know that that's here in hot waters especially. But we have to understand that socialism, too, was violently contrary to capitalism, and that the alleged goals of socialism was the abolishment of poverty, the achievement of general prosperity, progress, and human brotherhood. And the results have been a very dismal failure, to say the least. Now, while defending capitalism on moral grounds is difficult enough, defending anarchism on similar grounds is even more daunting, as most people regard anarchism as outright amoral or nihilistic in nature. And so I have my challenge before me. Okay, anarchism. It's important to define terms, of course, and instead of just throwing these words at you, capitalism, anarchism. The anarcho-capitalist is a staunch defender of the non-aggression principle. I'm sure there's probably a lot of people in this audience who know what that means. Does anybody know what that means? Non-aggression principle? Okay, everybody's good. Let's cover it anyway for clarity's sake, so there's no confusion, because it is paramount. Okay, before continuing, let's define the terms. After all, in the attempt to answer the rhetorical question and the title of the debate, what social system best serves humanity, we must understand that which is being proposed. Now, starting with anarchism, first of all, anarchy just means without rulers. And the rulers that it opposes is violent rulers. There's a lot more that could be said about that, but time is of the essence. Now, the question of violence brings us to the non-aggression principle, which is to say that it's exactly that. It is a principle. It's a principle that speaks against physical force. The initiation of physical force, so placing a great deal of emphasis on physical force. Physical force such as assault, murder, theft, rape, it's morally wrong and it's always wrong. Violence can take different forms, such as a punch to the face, kidnapping, incarceration, seizing private property, taxation, rape, shooting a person, etc. The heart and soul of the non-aggression principle speaks against the initiation of physical force. And initiation means starting the use of physical force against an innocent individual or individuals, one who has not himself started the use of force against others. So no single human society or human being can be said to be fully civilized if this moral is not observed. And we often hear denunciations of not of force, but of violence. And we often praise ourselves as being really good people because we're all against violence, right? It's nasty. You shouldn't have punched a kid in the schoolyard, Billy. We all give our kids little lectures like that. But violence names a particular form of force that is swift, intense, rough, and usually accompanied by fury. The moral issue I've been identifying, however, is not a matter of form, it's a matter of principle. So the evil of coercion is anyone who initiates its use, whether he's a wild-eyed thug brandishing a gun, or a prim little bureaucrat with his weapons on call, the police and the military, but discreetly out of sight, where the rule of brutality is moral, if carried out decorously, with the niceties of the electoral process observed. This is the violence that we don't see, this is the violence that we accept. And if you want to talk about other forms of violence permeating throughout society, it's because of this moral inversion that we're all under the umbrella of. Now, people have the right to use physical force in self-defense, of course, so it's not like unilateral pacifism or anything like that. Now, what is essential? The crucial principle that differentiates freedom from slavery. When you hear of all of history with people jumping over barbed wire fences and escaping gunfire and trying to jump borders to get to another country, why? Why? It's the principle of voluntary action versus physical coercion or compulsion. That's the reason why, the physicality of the forces that's imposed upon them. Now, usually freedom in a political context means freedom from government coercion, but lefties or other sundry collectivist types like to inflate the word coercion to mean anything from the employer who offers you a salary below your standard to the candy clerk who upsells from a small Coke to a large at the movies. But let's stay within the rationality. It does not mean freedom from the landlord, or freedom from the employer, or freedom to do whatever you please, including physical harm against others. You see, oh, you're not completely free because you can't go around just killing people, man. So you're not free. It's a bogus argument. And it does not mean freedom from the laws of nature, which do not provide people with automatic prosperity. It means freedom from the coercive power of the state, and nothing else. And but all the sophist word salad hand waving is meant to distract you from that fundamental moral premise. And in this case, I just speak of your standard Keynesian-like intellectuals or meteor commentators. Now, capitalism is a common belief inherited from Marx that government is necessarily an agent of economic interest, and that the political systems are to be defined in terms of whose economic interests they serve. So typically, capitalism is commonly regarded as a system in which the state predominantly acts to serve the interests of the business class, and socialism, the working class. But that's not capitalism. Capitalism, which contrary to widespread miseducation, is merely an economic system. It is the social system of individual rights, including property rights. So I repeat, capitalism is based on the recognition of individual rights, including property rights, in which all property is privately owned. And the principle of individual rights is the recognition of the fact that each person is morally an end in himself, not the means to the ends of others. Therefore, he morally must be left free to act on his own judgment for his own sake, so long as he does not violate the rights of others. And in order to sustain life, every living species has to follow a certain course of action, according to its nature. For human beings, the action required to sustain human life is primarily intellectual. Everything a human being needs has to be produced by his mind and produced by his effort. That's the origin of how we survive as a species. So production is the application of reason to the problem of survival. I'll repeat that. Production is the application of reason to the problem of survival. Freedom, as I've defined it, is the fundamental requirement of a human being's reasoning mind. Now, government, the state, I'll just go over that very quickly. The state or the government is a foreign intruder to this social process. Being a violent predator and parasite that does not contribute to the way of production and trade, but merely plunders wealth that had been created by others. So, as I've been defining violence, government is violence. It's not like governments can be violence. Governments, by definition, are. There is violence, institutionalized violence, by its very nature. So the quasi-legitimate function now performed by governments, such as the administration of justice, can, the anarchist position maintains, be provided by a marketplace. So, as I've said, to live, one must be able to take action by one's own choice, to support one's own life. That's the right to liberty. We are material beings. We need the freedom to keep the fruits of our labor and to use or dispose of them as we see fit. Now, the free market, what is the free market anyway? It's voluntary choice and agreement of all those who participate in the process of production and trade. That's all it is. A lot of people look at the free market as something that's separate from people, some ominous force, that, oh, the free market, it sounds like really ominous in the abstract, but it's people. That's all. It's just people interacting with one another on an entirely voluntary, cooperative basis. That's all it is. The free market is the application of the non-aggression principle as applied to production and trade. Production and consumption, as we've seen, there is no dichotomy between human rights and property rights. If anybody wants to keep a benchmark in your head, I know it might get questions regarding property rights and human rights, but deal with that during the Q&A. But there is no dichotomy between human rights and property rights. There is only a clash between consumers, and there's no clash, rather, between consumers and producers. In a free market, if you are a consumer, you are a producer. Nature does not grant anyone an innate title of consumer. It is a title that has to be earned by production. Production is primary. One cannot consume that which has not been produced. Only producers constitute a market. Only men who trade products or services for products or services in the role of producers. They represent a market's supply. In the role of consumers, they represent a market's demand. The law of supply and demand has an implicit subclause that involves the same people in both capacities. So if you're a producer, you're a consumer. If you're a consumer, you're a producer. Anything else would be, a handout, a gift, a loan, theft, fraud, extortion, whatever else is on the list. And it's okay to give gifts, that's okay. Now the 19th century was the ultimate product and expression of the intellectual trend of the Renaissance and the Age of Reason. And for the first time in history, it created a new economic system, that system of free trade on a free market capitalism. And all of mankind's history is the practical demonstration of a basic principle. The degree of human prosperity and achievement and progress is a direct function and corollary of the degree of physical freedom. So where you've had physical freedom, you have prosperity. You can see that in today's world. You don't have to go back to the 19th century. Compared to the centuries of pre-capitalist starvation, the living conditions of the poor in the early years of capitalism were the first chance the poor ever had to survive. And as proof of the enormous growth of the European population during the 19th century, a growth over 300% as compared to the previous growth of something like 3% per century. Capitalism not only delivered the goods, capitalism has created the highest standard of living ever known on earth. The evidence is incontrovertible. And if you're actually concerned about peace, it's helpful to know that capitalism gave mankind the longest period of peace in history, a period during which there was no wars involving the entire civilized world, from the end of the Napoleon Wars in 1815 to the outbreak of World War I in 1914. So the fact is, the paramount requirement of a society's productivity and prosperity is freedom. For the creation, ever since 1914, it's been an ever escalation of statism, not capitalism. Capitalism is not the problem. So from the creation of the Fed to FDR's New Deal, America's market has been hindered by an elaborate web of government restrictions, controls, interventions, and wealth distribution programs, and the once free market has been replaced with a burgeoning regulatory entitlement police state. That's the problem. Thank you.
All right. I did spend much time on this topic, but I've heard many other people make this association. Let's start with the classic assertion that the resource-based economy is just rehashed communism or socialism. Often those who criticize the capitalist free market model are pejoratively branded as communists or socialists, as though those were the only alternatives to an unregulated free market. This reveals the truly mind-locked thinking in which most societal analysis takes place, inside an artificially rigid frame of reference with a series of presuppositions that are never peeled back. And due to the cultural baggage associated with the term communism, usually the labeling of any new idea as such was a propaganda technique to eschew the idea without any critical thought or examination of the claims. It's an intellectually dishonest approach. But let's examine the claim quickly so we can move on to an actual addressal of the concepts themselves. The foundation of the resource-based economy is the application of science and technology to solve social problems and maximize human well-being, and thus the most efficient and sustainable use of Earth's resources. Absent a market economy, absent state control, absent central planning, it works to overcome scarcity by means of our technical reality to produce an abundance wherever possible. Communism was essentially based on a moral philosophy of eliminating class by eradicating private property. This isn't the basis of a resource-based economy. However, removing class divisions and overcoming the need for property are extensions of the train of thought that underpin the system. They are not the starting point. So resource-based economy's main goal, optimizing our use of the Earth's resources for maximum well-being. Communism's main goal, removal of private property to create a classless society. The reasoning underlying the tenets of each system are vastly different. So the claim that the resource-based economy is simply rehashed communism in whatever form is an ill-gotten claim. It's an association fallacy, in particular a prima facie association fallacy, which is where two ideas share a particular characteristic or tenet, and they are simply equated as the same. The claim is usually made because the person wants the association in an attempt to disparage and manipulate a dismissal of the idea. I hope we can move on beyond this. So, let's clarify a few terms. I see a lot of the inability to distinguish between the terms finite and scarce. Yes, we have finite resources on this planet, which is exactly why we need the intelligent management of them. Overcoming scarcity doesn't mean that we have an infinite amount of resources at our discretion. It just means that we have an abundance, which simply means that we have enough to meet people's needs. And on many levels, we easily have enough to meet the entire human population, from food to renewable energy generation to the transportation systems at our disposal to many extremely advanced technologies that can raise the standard of living for everyone beyond what's even possible in a market system. So let's go to some more claims. Okay. Often people in the free market school of thought, from whatever variation, will just say that a free market is voluntary trade. That's it. It's just people exchanging voluntarily with one another, and that any coercion that occurs is from the state. And I know Victor described a very precise kind of coercion, but if you look it up in the dictionary, coercion simply means someone who's just force against you. There's other kinds of coercion. Now, I don't really want to spend too much time peeling back dogma of the free market or the claims of the free market. I simply want to promote a new train of thought that is better suited to our current state of affairs in society right now. The free market is not based on optimizing the use of our resources for the well-being of everyone. It's simply, like Victor said, a market, obviously, of where people exchange goods. Now, there's obviously many negative outputs, both positive and negative outputs of trade. However, it doesn't represent the peak of what our technology can provide us. The need for trade is again based on a scarcity environment. There's simply not enough to go around. Hundreds of years ago, we invented money as a medium of exchange to divide up specialization. However, now in the age of technology, with our current scientific understandings, we can prooffully produce an abundance of all the necessities of life for everyone on the planet, which gets rid of the need for a medium of exchange. We're not against trade, it simply is no longer relevant to our survival. And I think I'll pause there and leave the rest of the points to address for our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Victor, your response?
Okay, we can only learn of the Zeitgeist movement through its foremost practitioners. There's a lot of activists, of course, such as Matt being the head spokesperson in Zeitgeist, the Vancouver Zeitgeist chapter. But a lot of people are learning of the ideas as pronounced, especially by Peter Joseph. And one particular quote just stands out as thunderstruck. I didn't cherry pick this, it stands out, it just left me aghast in my seat. And I think it permeates throughout the entire mode of thinking, and probably quite representative of the movement, I think. And I'll quote him. If it wasn't for the state, the free market would have self-destructed 1,000 times over. It is the state that stops the monopolies that are the natural gravitations within the system. It's the legal structures that keep things under control with the rapid amount of corruption that is built within the system as everyone gains for strategy and preferential advantage. If it wasn't for the state regulation and the legal system, we would have a circus of monkeys throwing shit at one another, trying to steal anything and everything. And if it wasn't for the state, the system would have self-destructed a long time ago. Now you can see here that he is separating the state and just looking at the free market, which is the real ugly id beast in our midst. The state, not the greatest thing in the world, but woo, thank God we have it though. So my God, the free market, you know. This is like a Thomas Hobbes Leviathan argument for justifications of the state. Bad as it is, living under a state, a necessary evil, and a free market, as I've defined it, people trading and volunteering with one another, uncoerced and without use of violence. You know, if it's not that, then it's something else. It's some ancient barbarism or whatever is going on. Or the caricature version of anarchy. So he talks about like monopolies, and this is something that is just so tired and dead. You know, you hear this from standard garden variety statists, let alone I don't know why the Zeitgeist people are going on with it as an argument. You know, free market leads to monopolies. You know, like thank God for the state, break up those monopolies. It's like I don't understand this, man. It's just like, hello, the state is a monopoly. Okay, the state is a monopoly. It's a violent monopoly. And it creates monopolies, not the free market. The nature of a coercive market is a closed entry, the barring of all competing producers from a given field. And that can be accomplished only by an act of government intervention in the form of special regulations, subsidies, or franchises. That's the historical fact. I'm all happy to debate very abstract, erudite kind of subjects though, but can we all come together on historical fact, empirical fact, verifiable fact? Now we don't live in a capitalist system any longer, just to make that clear. We live by shredding fragments of it. The world that can be described today would be described as a mixed economy, which there's a mixture of freedom, free market capitalism, and statism, freedom and controls. And because of the interventionist policies, the country is in a process of disintegration. I can speak of, Canada, I can very well speak, most especially speak of the United States, of course. So it's a vast civil war of pressure groups devouring one another. That's where you have the monkeys throwing shit around, all clamoring towards the state. That's what engenders the worst behavior in people. Which the Zeitgeist people are focusing on, and that's all well and good. In agreement with that. But just to take a very simple case though of mixed economy versus statist intervention, health insurance companies are some of the most regulated companies in America. Government intervention in the name of the right to health care to drives up costs and cripples industry. Such interventions is the cause of the healthcare crisis. Where supply and demand aren't skewered by government intervention, the problems don't exist. For example, LASIK eye surgery is widely popular. Its cost plunged from roughly $2,200 per eye in 1998 to $1,300 in 2004. What was the cause of the price decline in that area? but not in other areas. It could have something to do with the fact that eye surgery is not covered by government insurance, not covered by Medicaid or Medicare, and not heavily regulated. So the laser eye surgery is one of the few health procedures sold in a free market with price advertising, competition, and consumer-driven purchases. Yes.
Thank you, Victor. All right, so that was the first section of the debate, and now we'll do a Q&A. I will be the question master. So, starting off with a question to Victor. Many people are skeptical about individuals driven solely by monetary profit. In a capitalist system, even if it is free market, wealth inequality is likely to persist and the gap may even become bigger because of the economic ventures of these profit-driven individuals. How would you confront someone worried about this, and do you share similar concerns?
Are you talking about the disparity in income?
Disparity in wealth and I guess income, but more to do with wealth in general.
To do with wealth in general?
Yeah.
Is there a problem with it?
Okay, that's the question.
Okay, that's the question, okay. Well, the question assumes an implicit premise underneath it that somehow disparity in income is a bad thing in and of itself. That if you're doing better than somebody else, for whatever reasons, just because bad luck has fell upon them, or they're just not ambitious type of people, we're not all created equally. Metaphysically speaking, we're all supposed to be equal before the law, but just the fact of the matter is that we all have different minuses and pluses. So in a marketplace, given somebody's genetic makeup of who they are, who they decide to be, if you follow Aristotelian philosophy of being a self-made person, self-made soul, and you have different gifts, it's not an incumbent or coercion against anybody else if you're following your path. And if you do better than somebody else in this life, whether you get the blonde in the bathing suit and or acquire a greater wealth for yourself or to sustain your life, I don't see that there's anything wrong with that innately whatsoever, so long as it was all achieved on a voluntary means. However, I will say this though, there's a lot of people who tend to think that because of this, there's an intrinsic clash between people, that as if it was a zero-sum game, that somebody who gains and profits somehow has to be at somebody else's loss. That is not the case at all. I could go on to answer that, why that is not the case, why the profit mode is not a disastrous thing, if you want me to curve me.
Sure. Why not just a little bit?
Oh, just a little bit, okay, yeah. Yeah, well, the profit motive, like you hear this word shot out, you know, like as it was supposed to be a self-evident axiomatic evil, or it doesn't need any kind of definition or backup. It's just kind of like, and the profit motive, you know, that the ominous vibrations is supposed to bring up, and you're supposed to just get it. But this is the fault of modern philosophy. Profit, like in the sense of like if you stick a knife in somebody's ribs and ask for their wallet, you could say that, hey, that person lost their wallet, but I profited whatever cash they had in it, you know. So profit is bad, you see, profit is bad. Well, yeah, like in that sense, profit is bad. Of course it is. But in the sense of where, let's say if somebody has a paintbrush, I have $5 in my pocket, I want that paintbrush, he wants that $5 more than he wants the paintbrush, we make an exchange, mutual cooperation for mutual benefit. He profited, I profited. Profit is good.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. So a lot of the time, advocates of the free market often emphasize that it's about people voluntarily exchanging. They often don't focus on the competition that's inherent in the market, the producers that are gaming for market share. This produces winners and losers inherently. That's the basis of all competition. And for those who aren't aware, I recommend a book called No Contest, The Case Against Competition, to show how competition poisons every part of our society, psychologically, economically, in every aspect. So this social stratification is inevitably going to occur in a competitive society. People have differences in intelligence and in strengths, like my example in my opening statement. There's social stratification built into the structure. Now, is that inherently bad? Actually, yes. Many sociological studies show that the greater the degree of income gap in a society will lead to many different social problems. I recommend a book by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett called The Spirit Level, which correlates many aspects of mental disease to income gaps in many of the so-called first world countries. And it shows a very highly statistically significant correlation between the degree of income inequality and the number of social problems. The US, one of the most disparate countries on the planet, has some of the highest rates of violence and every social disorder you can think of. So competition is built in, and that's what the Peter Joseph quote that you think don't understand properly was trying to highlight. It's he's not promoting the government. We're against essentially the effects that the government have in the society. However, we see the government as simply an extension of the inherent mechanisms of the market. Since the market is built in, has built-in competition, people are trying to gain for strategy against one another, trying to get more and more market share. That gravitates towards monopoly. Now, it might not stay as a monopoly, and the government obviously will get in bed with corporations to try to maintain these monopolies, but that's essentially the inherent mechanisms of it. And we can't underestimate these inherent mechanisms, which I think many free market advocates simply ignore or blinker out.
Second question. I'm just going to keep going at Victor for now and then switch over.
I'm on the hot seat.
Yeah. So the environment seems to be a pretty hot topic these days. In an anarcho-capitalist society, how can mass production and consumption of a good or service that is clearly damaging to the environment be dealt with? What are some ways that you could think of?
Yeah, well, it's not a science that I specialize in, but people have been talking about pollution ever since the Industrial Revolution, and that it's something that's bespotted and despoiled the beautiful landscapes, and we hear this romanticism of pre-industrial civilizations, as if it was like some kind of like, I don't know, like a big open field where you have Julie Andrews singing the Sound of Music or whatever. But is anybody here ignorant about the pollution and the disease that was rampant prior to the pre-industrial revolution? Prior to industry, I should say. Is anybody aware of it? Is anybody lost on what life was like? Okay, it was wretched. If you want to talk about pollution and destruction and widespread mayhem, as I touched upon in my opening speech, the life expectancy was under 20 or under 30, if you were lucky, and you talk about poverty, and you talk about disparity between the subjects and the king, let's say, or a monarch of some type. But pollution is an offshoot of industry, of course it is, but it's a case for the further development of technology to handle these problems. And that's one thing that I can be sympathetic towards the Zeitgeist movement about, is that they're not like the old-fashioned die-hard Greens, where they're talking about dismantling an industrial civilization. That's not what they're coming about. They're talking about a society where we have the current level of technological wizardry that we have, with innovation to come. But the issue of solving pollution or environmental damage is a very real science, and it's not to say that something that's been entirely preempted by the Zeitgeist movement. Of course, that's something that would be a concern to all types of people, all people, and it's not something that would be ignored or bypassed with a free society. So it's not. It's something that's a concern with all people. It's not less when we have this model, then it's going to mean the destruction of planet Earth. Otherwise, I don't buy that.
Okay, basically there's two systems. There's the natural law, natural order of reality, nature, and there's the economic system that we use, the market. It's like trying to fit, to use a classic analogy, trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Why, the market advocates talk about government interference in the market. I'll talk about free market interference in actually establishing the highest levels of production and distribution that conform to what we call peak efficiency, peak sustainability. Why worry about mechanisms inherent in the market that will lead to pollution or anything? If we have the technical capability to install systems that produce almost zero amounts of pollution or very little, we just do them. To hell with what the market will allow, we just do it because that's what's technically possible. And that's the idea of a resource-based economy. There's no intermediary between what is possible and what's most sustainable, and an intermediary in the sense of what you use to accomplish it. We simply do it. That's the idea.
All right, thank you. So the Zeitgeist movement and resource-based economy talks a lot about using the most advanced science and technology we have today to create this new improved economy. However, in terms of law, how would a resource-based economy deal with law systems that vary from one region to the other, or would there be one universal law?
Okay, law is essentially a response to social insufficiency, which we seem to not recognize in our system today. We often deal with symptoms of social problems by enacting legislation, declaring something as a moral principle, like the non-aggression principle, or other haphazard attempts to patch over problems that are inherent to the mechanisms of the system. A resource-based economy figures out the most beneficial environment to create that brings up the best in human behavior, that figures out what causes violence, what causes drug abuse, what causes coercive acts. And the whole point of it is to design an environment that minimizes this to the lowest level possible. Major way to do this is by giving everyone access to all necessities of life without a price tag, without any need to submit to labor or coercive institutionalized forms of violence like the state. So law would be extremely minimized in a resource-based economy. In transition, law would of course remain because people's values would still be lingering from the monetary market model. And just as a slight tangent, although it's completely relevant to the question, is central to the resource-based economy, central to transitioning to any new social system, is the need for a complete value shift. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, you're trying to re-educate people. No, it's simply providing education to people, showing them what is possible if we employ science and technology. Now, if there are, cases of murder or theft, there wouldn't even be such a thing because everyone has access to everything and there's no money. But all these different types of crimes that might still exist to a much lesser degree than they do today. Obviously, these people need to be removed from society, but the way we treat people, the way we treat so-called criminals, has to be completely shifted. And I would refer to Dr. James Gilligan, who was a prison psychiatrist and now a former professor at Stanford, who worked with the most violent criminals that the United States prison system produced and figured out what were the root causes of people who behaved in that way and figure out the best way to rehabilitate them. So that's where the emphasis would be on. It would not be on just punishing people and creating laws to try to patch over the social insufficiencies. It would be to try to get to the heart of the problems and then figure out the most constructive way to rehabilitate people who break the law or suffer from mental illness or whatnot.
Since Matt does mention education, that is an important thing. It's important to remember that as I've been arguing for anarchism, more or less going on above the market, the free market and capitalism, it's important to realize the advancements in anarchist thought these days in regards to education, especially in the realm of where education begins in childhood. And we can thank such thinkers as Stefan Molyneux. I'm sure the audience here are familiar with that name. That we get right to the root of it, as opposed to any kind of like later adult education. We have to get to the root of the problem, which is how children are raised in the first place, of the type of people that they become. I'm not speaking of here in any type of a deterministic sense, but the sciences will tell you that detrimental and abusive homes leads to all types of nervous disorders and psychological problems. The science is coming out clear and loud on this. So even though it's not like fitting within the strict structures of a definition of anarchism, it's probably not known throughout anarchist thought, the history of the thought, but Lucinder Schooner and etc. and things like that. It just goes to show you that if we were to deal with the issues of the state and violence and ethics and the whole panorama of philosophical inquiry, that it does involve psychology, that it does involve the sciences. So once again, I want to suggest to you that in a stateless society, a totally free society, it's not like everything that Matt's been addressing would be absent. Education and the correction of aberrant behavior and so forth, and scientific advancements and the scientific method. These are the words that are being, heightened and preempted and jumped on, which leads to this opposition, not intentionally so, not necessarily, but if one is to speak of, the scientific method and this and that, it's kind of like, well, that's what they're advocating. That I guess Victor's not, though. It's like that's not the case at all. So if you're familiar with, there's a lot of thought and advances are being made into dealing with the questions of society as a whole. Anarchism is not just dealing with the issue of economics and politics. That it can encompass and does encompass of asking, you don't take politics as a primary. It rests on a body of thought. Politics and economics rest on deeper issues in philosophy, on ethics, metaphysics, epistemology, and it's all there. And I do give kudos to Stefan Molyneux for getting to the roots of an issue of a free society. And one such area is child rearing.
All right, thank you. All right, so we'll do this for another about 10 minutes and we'll have an intermission. Here are some questions to both of you guys. I'll ask this one to Victor first and then Matt can respond. What do you think is the most crucial philosophical barrier keeping both these ideological camps from working together? And do you think this can be overcome?
Well, yeah, I think, listening to Matt today, speaking about other forms of, I've been making a big case about, specifically the non-aggression principle, which leads to physical violence. That's not to say that there isn't other issues to contend with, and I could very well agree with that, in the sense of peer pressure and being your best, and the browbeating kind of father. You got to be your best. You got to be your best, and all the pressures of living in a modern society, where how we treat one another. And there's a lot of people who, even in the sense of even in the marketplace, sometimes you do get the feeling that it's all about making the buck, isn't it? It's all about making the buck. And some people think that just because they have a product and they're selling something, that even the person who's doing that, there's this underlying underpinning that it's all slimy and gooey and things like that. This is there's several reasons why there's this very unfortunate, ominous tones permeating the society. You can have that, but then you can say it's due to altruism as one, and not altruism in the sense of being nice to other people, but in the sense of to be good is to be self-sacrificial. Well, nobody. Who's the paragon? And this is what I cover in my book, Icons and Idols, Pop Goes to Culture. Who is the paragon? The enchilada of moral purity, and that would be Mother Teresa. But then you have a guy like Bill Gates and and Steve Jobs, they're just out for a buck, they were out for themselves, but they have lifted to the world and they made things much more convenient. And how we know that to be so is because they did become wealthy people. We said, yes, we like what you're doing. And that was their vote of confidence that we gave to them. that made them wealthy. We voluntarily made them wealthy. Okay, so it's this underlying philosophical tone of the kind of ethic that we're all under the umbrella of. It's very it's false, and that can kind of speak to the silent violence that permeates the society, as opposed to something that's overtly obvious, like a punch in the face. That's the undertone. Is a very misfortunate, mistaken, ethical ideas that we have about ethics.
Okay, next picture.
First of all, I don't agree about the Teresa comment. Read Christopher Hitchens' book, The Missionary Position. But anyway, to reiterate, the question was, what is the biggest barrier to cooperating with?
Oh, no, I don't approve. I'm not a fan.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But we register to the society.
Okay,
For the record. Okay.
So the question is, what is the greatest barrier to both cooperating?
Yeah, these two ideological camps working together, do you think this can be overcome?
Well, I think it can, but I think the greatest barrier to overcoming any type of division, whether it be personal growth, social growth, is overcoming our own indoctrination. We talk a lot about in the Zeitgeist movement something called establishment paralysis. This can manifest in essentially two ways. There's the market system. There's the system where a company is threatened by another company that has a competing product, they're going to do whatever they can to compete against that other company, regardless of whether that product that they're trying to put forward is superior or not. Governments obviously act as a tremendous stranglehold on technological progress for like the renewable energies that we can implement right now, rather than the fossil fuels that are currently being used. But on another level, we have to understand that the values of society, the values of the people in the society are only as good as the socioeconomic model that creates and reinforces these values. So in a market system where people are constantly competing for market share, people are constantly competing for labor, even the education system is based on competition, the whole thing is based on consumption. The growth economy is essentially intrinsic to the market model. And of course, marketing and advertising are rampant everywhere, so people have very materialistic acquisitive values. It shouldn't be a surprise that people act and behave the way they do. It's what the system produces. And again, you can't just legislate some sort of moral code to overcome this. You have to change the system that creates them. So I think the greatest barrier, to reiterate, is simply trying to overcome these emotional barriers where people become so ingrained in an ideology that it becomes there's suffering is created when someone challenges your worldview, whether it's economic, political, religious, or what have you. People are very much unable to think outside the box in which they've established emotional comfort.
All right, thank you. So just for the final question, this actually kind of ties into what you were just talking about. Maybe you want to add a bit to it, but becoming undoctrinated might be just be all and end all. What are the most important things people can do to bring about changes most commonly desired by the resource-based economy? And do you want to respond after most commonly desired by anarcho-capitalists?
Sure. Well, it comes down to changing your values. We advocate the methods of peaceful non-participation. Obviously, the Zeitgeist movement exists as a medium to become active in this area. There's chapters all over the world in over 70 countries now and hundreds of cities worldwide. The best way to get involved is to do your own little thing in injecting these ideas into conversation wherever you have it, withdrawing yourself from the system wherever possible, like whenever there's an election coming up, and point out to people the inherent flaws of the political system. Whenever there's some sort of environmental catastrophe in the media, try to point out to everyone that you can what is the root mechanism that's causing these problems, and while also continually showing them what is possible if we employ science and technology to its highest degree. I'd say that sums it up.
Great. All right, Victor?
Okay, it's being purported that there's all types of aberrant behavior that's endemic to the free market as such, that any kind of aberrant behavior that's been identified here is springs from and is the cause of the free market. That is not the case. First of all, we do not live in a free market, capitalistic, anarchistic, totally free society. It's shredded remnants of it, of course. But you can't say that things like competition or the profit motive is the cause of this behavior, because you have to ask another question, like what is, people who are, where do we primarily get our philosophy from? Where are we primarily educated from? What are the two main forces in the world in which we learn of the world and develop and adopt a philosophical framework? Right from the crib, you go into public schooling. That accounts for a lot of the behaviors. I mean, why are kids going to the public schooling if it's not to enter in them some framework, some mode of values or whatnot? They're doing an abysmal job. It's a disaster. That has to account for a lot of the things of how people are. Religious instruction. So that's another thing.
So would avoiding these institutions be something someone like me or you or anyone listening to this recording could do to reach the kind of society that you think is most beneficial for humankind?
Oh, it would be if we were to hand over schooling to voluntary choice and to the market. It's not necessarily the case of being a free market advocate where, yes, if we had private schoolings, that's where you would have to send your kids because you're a free market advocate, aren't you? So send your kid to some private institution. No, it's called free choice. You can homeschool. That's called freedom. So a lot of people think that it's just like, well, just the market, huh? Like, no, it's education at home as well. That's an option. That's what freedom is. You can go to the market or refrain from going to the market. You can shop at that store, but not that one over there. It doesn't mean because you're an advocate of the free market that you have to shop everywhere. You vote with your dollars and you make your own choices. But in terms of like the state turning out docile, compliant citizens who are incapable of thinking and critical thought, they would not be fodder for all the trickery and the bright lights and the flash of modern advertising, which does try to hook into psychology and things like that. But with a generation of critical thinkers, advertising would be nothing more than information. Well, that's interesting. So I don't have to talk in the Wall Street Michael Douglas white brick as a phone. Now they have this thing called the iPhone. Thanks for the information. I think I'll get me one of those. That's the place that advertising would have.
All right, cool. Well, let's end it there. That's the first question.
Do you want to start with a question, or shall I?
I'll leave that to the ringmaster. Who's to ask a question first?
Rock, paper, scissors.
So you're going to do some competition here?
Yeah. Let's take a vote.
Yeah.
Let's just pick a man. All right. Let's start with a very simple one. You understand from your research that a resource-based economy is an entirely voluntary system, right?
It is.
It is. Yeah. You're okay with that statement?
I'm okay that's what's being purported.
Okay. If you have would you like to?
Oh, okay.
Your case as to why it might not be? Or?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well,
Sorry. Just one more thing. Sure. We're not just asserting that it is. The whole point is to create a system that's intrinsically voluntary, where we don't have to just assert some sort of voluntarism principle, but the system is fundamentally has voluntary actions built into it.
Voluntary within it. Okay. Well, see, here's the thing. Like, I took great pains to define the non-aggression principle. I went backwards over to drive that home. I took 5-7 minutes to drive that home in my opening speech. So obviously, I'm placing a very high premium on it. And I'm not speaking of the non-aggression principle as some kind of like free-floating abstraction that's removed from everything else, such as the free market. Now, a lot of people, when they hear the buzzword free market, especially as espoused by politicians, they'll talk about, yes, it's a free society, you get to vote, don't you? You know, and there's, of course, it's a sham. It's all coercive within that.
Sure, but I was asking about the resource-based economy. If you have any objections with regards
Well,
to...
you know, my preamble's going somewhere.
Okay.
Okay. So I took great pains to not just speak of the non-aggression principle, and then, oh yeah, and there's over here is the free market. It's all an indivisible whole. Okay, they're not segmented parts of where, well, yeah, I hear what you're saying about the non-aggression principle, but that free market stuff that you were defining had pros and cons with that. No, the market is the application of the non-aggression principle insofar as the production and trade is concerned. Just as you have other types of relationships, like personal relationships, it is all voluntary. Doesn't mean that the people won't have heartbreaks and relationships won't work out. You know, you can't say that, well, that's endemic to voluntary relationships. So you do have all this offshoot stuff that might not be like totally in the abstract optimal of how things could be in some alternate universe. But so long as the non-aggression principle is observed, that applies to however happens from there. We don't know. People, well, whether I'm not advocating it must be cash currency-based society. I don't know. Let's say that we had a totally free voluntary society and cash wasn't a part of the equation. I doubt it, though. But I have to ask this question, though. Why is there this antipathy? This is what I'm leading to. Especially when the anarchist bends over backwards defining the non-aggression principle in the free market. Why is there still this continued rush towards it? No, a disaster, you're wrong, and flame wars on the invite page. How is it voluntary then?
Okay, well, first of all, I disagree that the market is inherently voluntary. If people don't have access to what they need, they're going to behave in whatever way they need to in order to get what they need. So, since the whole system is based on competition, and you've conceded that social stratification is a byproduct of this, there's always going to be winners and losers, which means that there's always going to be poor pockets of the population who can't get everything that they need, which inherently creates aggression, coercion, all the violence that we see today. That is the mechanism that I don't see that you're acknowledging.
Okay, yeah, but then at least other questions such as well, I guess I can ask my question. I guess it follows along these lines then. Okay, all right. Pavil's just taking this all in, you know, he's listening to the answers and he's thinking about other things. Okay. Now, one of the things that I read from, I think it was from one of the websites, or the website, a resource-based economy is a plan for sustainable management of the planet's resources. This is impossible in a commune. It doesn't matter how well a small group of people are capable of living when the planet around them is being raped of resources and polluted like a toilet. So, this has to ask the question of, like, if you place some other kind of, like, on a hierarchy, let's say, of values, if you were to place something as much more important than the non-aggression principle, you might pay lip service to it, say, yeah, by and large, that's how people should live, but you know what? There are certain ethical canons that preempt and trump that, though. And you know, you can't, you know, it's not the best thing in the world, but you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. So, you know, to make this transition to over a resource-based economy, yeah, it's going to be kind of like ugly to get there, but it's for the greater good, the common good. And you've known throughout the history of philosophy that this has been an ongoing problem for 24 centuries of justifying the great golden society where, you know, that a few eggs had to be broken to make that omelet. And for the common good, for the greater good, for the good of, it's been justified under many different names, for the good of society, for the common good, for the race, for the proletariat, for the ecology, and where human beings become indispensable cells to that greater good. So that is the issue that a lot of philosophically inclined anarchists would at least address themselves to.
So what exactly is the question or the main?
Well, the transition. Like, how are we to make this transition? Because we are talking about, it's an incredibly, if you talk about like a plan, you know, setting your goals. I mean, this is a humongous goal of making the transition to include 600 million people. Like I say, going to a totally free society, I don't have like any model of how that has to be, so long as like physical coercion is not used against one another. If it's a cash-based currency society or not,
okay,
I don't know.
You seem to be a little all over the map here. I mean, on one hand, there's there's the transition how you get to another society, and the other hand, which we were talking about before, was simply the attributes of the system we want to see. So which one do you want to tackle? The understanding the system we need to move towards, or how to move towards it?
Yeah, so well, I'd just like to say, if I would like to, first I don't know of any reads that I've done that spoke of this transition. It's always just assumed that we're there, like, and in a post-scarcity society, it's just like, oh, we're there, are we? It's just like, it's taken as like some kind of like historical determinism, that once we're there, what's the transition, what's the blueprint? I mean, I could speak of like going to a free, stateless society. All right.
Okay, well, here's the 37-step plan. No, there isn't one. You can't speak in such finite terms, such direct terms. There's obviously that's the most difficult question to answer. There's far too many variables to evaluate, to figure out a concrete step-by-step approach. However, we need to understand where we need to go, and the real emphasis needs to be placed on education, on the values of the population. Since we don't believe in any type of coercive approach to just forcibly, make people move in this direction. It's all based on if people want it, then it will happen. If people don't, then it's simply not going to happen. There's many different economic transitions that we can make, such as reducing the need of our dependency on the market system. For example, we easily have enough renewable energy potential to power the world with geothermal, solar, wind, wave, tidal, without having to use fossil fuels at all, without anyone needing to pay for it. We can produce it in abundance. So you could take each of these isolated pockets and essentially remove the market system's interference in these areas. There's a good lecture that was done in our past Z-Day by Ivo Mori, and it was all about the transition, documenting, or I guess pointing out possible transition scenarios. But there's no concrete plan because there simply cannot be.
Okay, but here's the question though. I'm talking about a hierarchy of values though. Like if the non-aggression principles placed on here. Okay, that's the thing. Is that sacrosanct? Because if that's not up there, if that is up there, like in the sense that it's sacrosanct, inviolable, then if we do not move towards this society, okay, what is wrong with the non-aggression principle as I've defined it? You talk about, there's a great focus of all the, what's the word, the externalities or systemic violence and coercion and whatnot?
Systemic violence?
Right. Is that like I'd rather have be able to choose the romantic partners that I would have. It might not work out. Okay, of course, that's fine. As long as it's voluntary. It doesn't mean, I want to guarantee you that this will work out. There's no such guarantee.
Okay, so
is there something, is it going to be in the case of where these other inequities, as we want to call them that, are so much more greater and horrendous and there's going to be no toleration for them, that we have to break a few ways? Because that is the great emphasis that's being placed within this movement.
Okay, so there's absolutely nothing wrong with the non-aggression principle. Obviously, we completely acknowledge it. However, like I mentioned in my opening statements, it's not enough to have a moral principle at the social core. You need to have the designed-in structural attributes that reinforce these values. So, even if we just say, okay, we're going to have these great morals of sharing and cooperation, you can't just say that you're going to do that. You have to have an environment that reinforces these values. So the basis of a resource-based economy isn't just wanting to employ the non-aggression principle. It's to design an environment that brings out the best of human behavior. The goal is to maximize human well-being as much as technically possible according to our utmost scientific understandings. That's the basis.
Okay, now but here's the thing though, this is a positive ideology that has a certain set of canons and structures and dictates and whatnot. Anarchism, like in the sense of being a non-system, I call it like a political atheism. It just speaks of like what is our natural, we're born free. You don't have to be counseled of that and instructed and things like that. And as I suggested in my opening talk, this is what the world is moving towards throughout all the centuries. That jumping borders and barbed wire fences, people want to be free. This is nothing where you have to be educated in. This is nothing that has to be inculcated by any kind of ideology. So the danger, I think, is when you take human beings, bypass any understanding of psychology, human nature, ethics, and whatnot, trying to stuff people into an ideology. And that has been the disaster of communism,
Okay.
for example.
It's quite the opposite. We're not bypassing human nature in any sense. The whole first part of Zeitgeist moving forward, and much of the movement's focus is on understanding what really is the nature of human nature. And the best way to understand it really is that we have basic human needs that need to be filled both on a biological level and a psychological level. And if you don't meet those needs, you're going to have negative outcomes. The market system simply doesn't guarantee that people's needs are met, right?
Well, yeah, no, but I wouldn't consider like the principle of trade as something that is like, it has to be, indoctrinated at some kind of like school. I think it's something that arisen very organically, that is part of the nature. Yeah.
I would disagree with that. I mean, if you have the technological potential to provide access to people with food, education, transportation in abundance, what is the point of trade when people simply have access to it? We're not saying trade is bad. We're saying we need to remove the need. We can remove the need for it. If people always forget, it's not it's not the good they want. It's not property they want. It's immediate access to those goods that they need. And if we can do so in a superior manner through our technology, we're advocating that we do so.
Would you say that there's anything positive to be said for competition? Because after all, we're not talking about an industrial civilization that, as we know it today, that we're just in one fell swoop, we have like the level that we're at right now. It was because of market forces, because of competition.
Okay.
Not so much as like in the sense of like my whole modus operandi is to beat the other guy, but as to the motivation can be, I want to do better. I want to be maximized and to bring my very best to what I do. It's a matter of pride. And that you have use and disposal over that. It's more or less being able to control that which you created. And it's competition. We can see directly that it's competition that has risen from a certain level of technological development and freedom. Competition is just a byproduct of freedom. Okay.
That's a loaded statement to me. You're going to have to really break down what you mean by those terms, freedom and competition.
I spent 15 minutes on the opening speech defining freedom.
Well, it's a very abstract word that can be used in many different contexts. You talked about freedom, meaning freedom from government coercion. I mean, we're in the market system, you're essentially only as free as your purchasing power will allow you to be. And in the natural world, we're only as free as the natural laws allow us to be.
Yeah, no, but that's looking on a surface level, where the human race was born into poverty. Okay, so if we were can
you qualify that statement? I don't understand that assertion.
Well, I mean, like in the sense of like ever since the development of, since we crawled out of the caves or crawled out of the swamps and whatnot and developed our agricultural cultures, all of the world that we find ourselves as human beings, going back dating prehistory, that's what I mean when we were born into poverty. We had to start from scratch. And so the whole thing, though, is that according to our nature as human beings, unlike the other living species, we don't have claws, we don't have instincts as they do, we don't have great feats of physical prowess in the sense we're vulnerable in nature. Our whole means of survival is the capacity of our reasoning mind, not just opposable thumbs, right? So in the creation and the production of making the world hospitable to live, okay, it's a progress towards that. It just doesn't come in one fell swoop. So it was competition, it was freedom from physical coercion, so we can act on our conclusions.
Let's examine that then. So a lot of free market advocates say that it was capitalism that spawned many innovations in history. I call that a causation fallacy. There's no way you can make that claim if you don't understand all the possible other social systems that have occurred, that could have occurred in its place. So you're simply, I think, mixing up correlation and causation. And the proof of this, I think, is if you look at the social sciences, if you look at all the research that's been done on competition. Again, I'll mention Alfie Cohen as a prominent sociologist who we're actually planning an event with in a couple of months at Churchill Secondary, who wrote his first book. It's good advertising there. Basically, his whole first book looks at about 400 different studies that show that competition is not a part of human nature. It's not more cooperative than, it's not more productive than cooperation. It doesn't build self-esteem. It doesn't build character. And it's actually not more enjoyable when you're exposed to cooperative games. So competition is a huge myth. It's not. it's not part of our human nature. And if you look at the science of motivation, people like Dan Pink, who wrote a book called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, finds that competition is actually an impediment to innovation, that extrinsic motivators like money, grades, praise, are detractors when it comes to creativity and innovation. It's actually intrinsic motivation, liking what you do, understanding the greater purpose for it, is what actually causes the human mind to innovate.
Okay, yeah, no, the profit is being limited to the only chasing of the buck. Of course, everybody lives their life to profit, okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. Every type of relationship has its own currencies. You take, once again, like friendship and romantic relationships, you're seeking for the betterment of yourself in the sense of gaining happiness, companionship, or whatever. That's another way of defining profit. We're all moving towards profit. Now this scatological, pejorative ways of saying, oh, it's all about chasing the buck, and it's kind of ignoble to other purities in life, like relationships, and it's just cold cent calculations. Chasing the buck, money, it's just another good, just like in the sense of like an apple that you would eat. It's a resource, you eat it, you consume it, you need it to live. Just like you want to pursue your happiness and productive, happy relationships. Money is just another good on the market, whether it be in the market of business and trade, or in the market of love and friendship relationships.
All right, guys, I'm just going to stop right there. Does the audience want to keep this back and forth going, or do we want to move on to questions?
Let's move on.
Move on to questions? All right, great. I changed my mind. I want to be like Jerry Springer, and I'm just going to walk around, and then whoever has a question, I'll run up to you guys. I need some exercise.
You had a discussion about both government and the effects of government and all that kind of stuff. The argument I would make that corporations are private entities that control government. I think we can see the effects currently, so I think the effects are great. Then you have a positive opinion of corporations, you think they're a negative opinion of corporations, but there's no doubt in my mind that corporations, private corporations, control government today. Now, having said that, what I think we have a problem is the problem of concentration of capital. So, how would you stop concentration of capital, which is what's been used to control government? How would you stop the concentration of capital in a anarcho-capitalist society so that we actually had competition and all the things you talk about?
Yeah. Well, corporations, as I think most people know, I'm not sure, are just bastard offsprings of the state that have been granted special privileges. This is the type of corporation or corporatism that we're speaking of, crony capitalism, and done to in the sense of like where politicians corporations will buy off a politician and they scratch each other's back that way through nefarious backdoor dealings. Of course, this is reprehensible. Now, like in the sense of that, it's the corporations that have the politicians in their back pocket. That once again all speaks to, and this is another way of how like the word privatization gets a very muddied connotation towards it. Anything that's private, like private property, private interests, or profit motive, or the individualism, all this becomes like very tainted and ugly. But you have to realize that the government holds the exclusive monopoly on violence. They do not call the shots. They are the ones that have the tomahawk missiles, the tanks, the guns, the regulatory, the military, the police, and the corporations. They're amiss in the society. They're just responding accordingly, or businesses. They are gaming for advantage, to use Peter Joseph's words there, because this is the society that they're living in. I mean, if we lived in a concentration camp and you were ordered to put a gun to somebody's head and blow their brains off, things like that, you know, like that's the type of environment that you would have. You would have like a violent, totally disreputable, hell on earth kind of like situation, but that's not how people behave. So the type of society that we live in, where the government, the state, endangers all of this kind of like ill-gotten behavior, where you have like civil wars, you know, like in the sense of like everybody running towards the state for special favoritism towards their group. And then you have like this vast lobbying, and you have the citizens against one another, and you have like the democracy people running towards to get a certain person in power so that they can take advantage of the other section of the population at their expense. This is the type of world that we're living in. So it's not the corporations or businesses or privatization as such.
If I can respond to that, I don't think you necessarily answered his question. I don't think at all. There's
Concentration of capital.
Concentration of
How do
capital.
you
How
stop
do you prevent
concentration
that?
of capital? You've talked about the government being a problem. Just to give one example, there's been lots of examples. I could give you lots of them. Concentration of capital in the private sector, one private sector over another private sector. Forget the government aspect. All I want to know is how do you stop a concentration of capital in a anarcho-capitalist society? Unless you don't think there's a problem with
I don't
concentration
know
of
if I would
capital.
necessarily want to stop it, because I don't know if you want, how you're qualifying it. The business makes a mass of money, an enormous wealth, based on offering a product or a service that people voluntarily want, and they amass from that great wealth. If you want to call that concentration of wealth, I have nothing against
But
that.
there's also power and influence that comes along with that mass concentration of wealth and
And
power.
that power and influence has been directed towards, to favor politicians.
Well, it can be directed at the board of directors of a private company and get them to change their transportation policy so that they can charge more to certain customers over their.
You're talking about collusion?
Well, you can talk about whatever you want. Talk about collusion. You can talk about what's
Monopolies?
Monopolies. What's the when you get 4 or 5 organizations together?
Oligopolies?
Well, yeah, a variety of those kind of things.
Yeah, but.
And that can happen in strictly in the
I've
private
already
sector.
answered this question though, like following up my opening speech and then in the response, I dealt with the issue of monopolies. There is no monopolies that are formed in the free market. All monopolies are government granted, and the greatest monopoly of all is the state. So any monopolies that history has shown has been government orchestrated.
I think
I think if
you're
you
correct.
reset the free market to an equal playing field, it's simply a matter of time before you'll get to what we have today. The whole thing is based on a gaming strategy, to use Peter Joseph's words, competition, and all of these concentrations of capital are inevitable in the system. Even if you didn't have a government, these people want to amass power and control. So what are they going to do? They're going to use any means they can to try to usurp more power and control. That's what they did with central banks. That's what they do. That's what we'll do with the governmental body. It's not going to last. It's going to continually. It's going to get corrupt no matter what.
No, I even place a cap on the government's power. The only means of power that they have is the power that we give them by our moral and intellectual sanction. We've been hoodwinked through public indoctrination and by the reinforcement of media. Large swaths of people are waking up these days, but the government as such, they have no power other than the power that we give them. Now the power that we give to businesses is the greatest democracy of all, is voting with our dollars. So if they're doing something that we feel that is damaging, okay, you have that power to withdraw. You have to make a difference between economic power and political power. It's not the same thing.
All right, I think let's move on to another one.
Hi there. So I think a big part of both your ideologies incorporate the principle of non-aggression, or that we come together in society to be amicable. With that in mind, what insurance against physical, marketplace, and systemic violence do your
Who are you asking this question to?
Both of you. I'd like a response from both. What insurance against physical, marketplace, and systemic violence do your different societal frameworks provide?
Let's go first, since that's.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. My old ears.
What insurance against physical, marketplace, and systemic violence does your societal framework provide?
Well, yeah, no, insofar as that was also touched upon as well. Like, there's no question about it that I think that education is a very good thing, like in the sense that, especially that education that is self-directed. You know, there's a lot of people, so long as if they're not encumbered in a society where you have compulsory mandated state education, the development of the human mind will flow much all the better. And there will be, as opposed to when people get out of school, the last thing they want to look at is a book. That encouraging of intellectual curiosity, you will not buy into all these things. If you're in an abusive relationship, for example, you know, and everything that can be considered systemic violence, hoodwinked by the flashing glare of marketers and advertisers and all of that, hey, you're a bright guy, because this is what I've heard about like, the Zeitgeist movement, is that from a lot of the advocates, is that you have a well-educated population that just are hoodwinked into a lot of bullshit, you know. So the same thing goes with an anarchist society. There's a great deal of focus on the development of the human mind, and a lot of thinkers, like I said, like Stefan Molyneux, is starting with child development and the proper rearing of children, of peaceful parenting. So so it will be an atmosphere in which you will not have people who are that aberrant in their behavior, and you'll have people who will not be tolerant of it if they have more of a sense of self-esteem or self-efficacy and a greater holding of who they are as human beings.
All right, do you want to respond?
The market makes it difficult, if not impossible, to properly raise children, as Gabor Mate eloquently speaks about in many of his books and lectures. If people are constantly out for themselves in the marketplace, working a 40-hour per week job, they're not going to have as much time to look after their kids. And many of the problems that are structural to the market simply cannot be solved simply just by educating people. You have to have a systemic basis that ensures non-aggression and non-violence. And that's exactly what the resource-based economy is designed to do. What are our human needs? How do we best design an environment that ensures people get their needs met? And that's the idea.
Okay.
I would like to know how your perspective on would be handling something like electronic participatory democracy or e-democracy, where the thoughts of people would make the decisions for either country or the world or whatever you prefer.
Electoral politics?
Electronic participatory democracy or electronic direct democracy, same thing.
Well, I might be getting an education here. I'm not sure if I heard it.
It's participatory democracy that's essentially through electronic means. So basically, you're getting to vote on what happens in the society.
Oh, okay. This is kind of part of it.
More than vote, the decisions would be made from the ideas that the individual citizens or people, if you're talking about the planet as a whole. So.
Right. Okay, well, I guess we'll start with the resource-based economy perspective. I know we spoke about this last week or the other week, but the idea in the resource-based economy is to arrive at decisions using the scientific method. It's not just, what do you think, it's, well, what do you actually know? When you need a root canal, you don't just let the populace decide where to go. You go to the dentist because they're technically skilled, they're technically trained in that profession. You don't question their, you know, it's just not a matter of an opinion is what I'm trying to say. It's based on the technical know-how. So in a resource-based economy, there would be a form of participatory democracy in the sense that you get to communicate what your desires are, and this is constantly being updated in the whole resource management system, production, distribution systems that will be continually under transition to meet people's needs. So, I mean, I could go off on many different tangents about what you mean, but...
Can I ask you another little bit of a question on that?
Okay.
You're saying it would be under the scientific method and decided by the scientists, I presume?
People who are trained in the respective fields. So everyone has the opportunity to participate, but they need to be educated in that area.
What this reminds me of, and please remember, back in Greece, in the years, you know, back when democracy was invented, that the philosophers were the scientists, and there was a proposal, I think by Aristotle, if I'm correct, that they would want to. That he would prefer to see a governing system based on...
You're talking about Plato, the Philosopher Kings?
Philosopher Kings, right. It reminds me of the Philosopher Kings.
Okay, I'm not really that familiar with it. I just let the logic stand on its own. I mean, democracy today is essentially mob rule. It's non-white guys hanging a black guy. Just because the majority of the population wants to do something doesn't make the decision correct. So we want to arrive at decisions through the best available methods that we have at our disposal, constantly refining our techniques. That's the idea.
Okay. Yeah, like, just to follow up on this, because I got a better tenor of the question that you were asking. Okay, the whole idea of the philosopher Keynes was, of course, that they were a small elite of specially trained, brilliant human beings that would look over society as an anthill and best to decide how that society is to be run. And Plato's Republic is the first blueprint of a totalitarian state, which has gone through various permeations throughout history from other philosophers, such as Immanuel Kant and Hegel and Thomas Hobbes and the like. And so it developed from Plato. But the whole idea is that, like, how is it that they're the special elite? Well, later on, the divine right of kings, and so forth. So in this sense, and it's not a criticism that I'm sure that you've heard it, is like, in this sense, computers are inert, they don't program themselves. So it would call for a special elite of a small cadre of programmers who would be designing, and in that sense, calling the shots.
It's not an elite. We don't think of scientists today as technically elite. They're simply trained in their profession, and the same would exist in a resource-based economy. People who are trained in engineering would be supervising the engineering rules. There's nothing elite about that.
This whole thing about like a scientific community or a scientific world, this is not a new idea. Communism itself, you knew it was coming, right? It's like, communism itself was scientific socialism. You just can't have people running around doing what they want and buying and selling and trading, things like that. We need order and cohesion. So, like, in this case, it was the state that decided how many wedges are going to be produced and how the resources are going to be allocated, because we need order and structure. We can't have this chaos otherwise it would just be a bunch of, the citizenry would just be a bunch of chickens with their heads cut off, bumping into each other, running all over the place. They wouldn't know what to do. But this is not how things work, though. So this whole idea of adopting the phrase, the scientific method, to encompass all of society of how that should be run, I think is a well-deserved eyebrow raiser. Like, oh really? Like, where have I heard this before?
Okay.
Again, an association fallacy, which I already covered, and the idea again is not to run people's lives through the scientific method. It's to update our industrial systems, management, production, and distribution to the utmost that science and technology can provide. That's based on simply technical data. That's not a matter of opinion.
All right, got another question?
This is for Matt. I'm just hoping you could elaborate a little bit more on how everybody's needs are being met under the Zeitgeist strategy or philosophy. And if everybody's needs would be considered homogenous, or is there a differentiation between need and want?
Okay, yes, of course there's a distinction. I think the best way I've found to distinguish is that wants are simply subjective needs, meaning everyone has basic human needs in the sense of food, water, and shelter, and then we also have basic human needs in the psychological sense. Now we all have, in many different categories, we have subjective preferences as to how we want to meet those needs. But the need of food and water is very much objective. However, you might want to eat different food and different beverages to meet those subjective wants, which are rooted in needs. So to get back to your original question, though, the resource-based economy provides access, abundance of all goods and services to its population. I don't see how this is designed to, this idea, this model is designed to meet as many needs as possible, given what our current capacities of science and technology can provide us. Whereas a market system is simply based on purchasing power. In a resource-based economy, everyone has access to it because we have this ability to produce in abundance, meaning meet the population's needs with much redundancy.
Needs, we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Well, not necessarily, well, that's a good reference point.
Yes.
Although objective human needs can be quantified. Again, like I've been describing, we have we all have a need to eat, to drink, although how we pursue those needs are subjective based on your condition. Is that clear up? Or do you have a...
So the impression I've gotten is that human nature is a core part of what forms both sides of the debate here. And what I wanted to do is just share the impressions I've gotten of what I think Zeitgeist thinks of human nature and what anarcho-capitalism thinks of nature, and just get your feedback and see if you guys agree. So the impression I've gotten of Zeitgeist is that it says that humans are flawed, and for the human race to thrive, they must be controlled. Now, on the anarcho-capitalist side, I get the sense that they believe human nature is flawed, full stop. So I just wonder, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think either of us would agree with that, but anyway, human nature isn't flawed in the sense, we characterize human nature in the context of your basic human needs. If your needs are met, again, whether through biological needs, food, water, shelter, and psychological needs, if your needs are met, you're going to grow up to be much more fully functioning human beings who's capable of empathy, who exhibits cooperative tendencies, stuff like that. If your needs are not met, then your behavior and values are more likely to be to manifest into negative human characteristics. So there's no fixed human nature. It depends on your environment. Genes play a certain role in predisposing you to certain behavioral propensities, but it's really the environment that triggers these propensities. And again, if you haven't seen the first part of Zeitgeist Moving Forward, the third film, it does an extremely good job, I think, at quantifying and trying to break down what is human nature. There's no fixed human nature, it's human behavior, and that is dependent on the environment that produces it.
Well, this would be a good example of where we can be of one mind on this issue. Yeah, no, I'm very leery of the whole concept of flawed human nature as if it was intrinsic. This is an idea that has been inculcated and propagandized through different intellectual sources. You can take, for example, Christianity's original sin, because of our original parents way back yonder, because of their original sin, and the sin being disobedience to the authorities, we're contaminated with this little priestly thing called original sin, so that even with a newborn baby, it has to be baptized. I'm speaking to a specific denomination within Christianity, of course, but the whole idea is like it's born in sin, and you have to have the witch doctor to sprinkle some holy Avion water on the infant and spare some time from purgatory, which I understand has recently been canceled by the official Catholic doctrine. So it was a reality before, but now it's been canceled. It doesn't exist anymore. And there's other things that to speak of negatively of human nature as well. So that you have Freud with his whole conception of the id and the superego, and the id is just like a secularized version of original sin. It's innate, it's intrinsic to you, and so it just goes on, gives you an idea of like why we have this very negative view when it comes to. That's just like another social bromide that we're all supposed to stand in line. We're supposed to know. We don't qualify it, we don't define it, we don't make an argument for it. It's just as soon as you hear, human nature. Well, the human nature, it just means negative. It just means bad. Well, there's a lot of it kind of like airbrushes the whole entire template of the human being about the capacity for generosity and love and brave feats of acts of bravery and creating art and caricature art and writing books called Pop Goes the Culture. How about all the positive things of human nature?
All right, thank you.
It occurs to me I didn't quite answer your second suggestion that we believe that human beings need to be controlled. Quite the opposite. They need to be free, they need to have all their needs met, and that's the only way that you're going to get the positive traits of human behavior to actually flourish.
Alright, hey guys. Alright, question. So with the resource-based models, so we're saying there's no private property, right? So that includes housing, obviously. So how do you decide who gets to live in Yaletown and who gets to live in Chilliwack? You know what I mean? No offense to people in Chilliwack. I've got a quick one for
Okay, well,
Upward mobility, Chilliwack.
again, the assumption of property is based in a scarcity environment. There's not enough to go around, rather as opposed to access. A resource-based economy focuses on making as many goods and services freely accessible to everyone. Now, there's a huge amount I could say on the value system disorder that's essentially inherent in the question that assumes that people will all want to live in that 10,000 square foot mansion. This is a matter of human values, and our system today constantly reinforces this materialism and acquisition that makes people want to have five Hummers and a couple of fighter jets and everything like that. These are value systems, value system disorders that we need to grow out of. People, if we can't move past this, we're never going to get to a resource-based economy. And let's answer the question specifically. Housing would simply be made available to people. It's unlikely in a resource-based economy that you want to stay in a static place for years on end. There'd be nothing holding you down to stay in the same place. Because of the job or monetary constraints, you could move around continually. You could simply go onto the internet, type in what it is that you're looking for in terms of residence, typing in all the different variables that meet your needs or your wants, and there would be a search result that showed you what's available in the particular area that you're in. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah. And I just want to say I agree with the majority of what the resource-based economy is saying. I think it's a lot more logical. I think it makes a hell of a lot more sense than what we're doing right now, just on my position.
Well, I can agree with that too.
Well, well, it was kind of brings me to my question for you, which is sort of a more technical one, but what do you think of the current monetary policy, specifically I would say in America right now, and with respect to where interest rates are set, with respect to their quantitative easing program and everything, and where do you see this heading for them as a country over the next, let's say, few years if they continue this the way they're conducting business right now?
Yeah, no, well, I think we all know the answer to that question. Of course, to top the word, it's not sustainable. Okay, at some point, the balloon is going to burst. Okay, and then people will really, I think, at that point in time, understand that there be no delusions here. I'm sure you probably agree with me. The balloon is going to burst. There is going to be an economic collapse. We're not going to recover this time. Okay, a lot of people, there's economies that are collapsing already around the world. Now, a lot of people who are completely in denial when it comes to the United States. They might be suffering from other forms of indoctrination, like manifest destiny, like, oh, well, that's other countries in the world, but this is America. So, but I think we all know that this. I think we all know the answer to this question. That
I don't think we do.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess it depends upon. Well, I've been looking into it, So there's a lot of people. I just take it for granted that people that you would come to a lecture like this or a debate like this, that mostly people here are self-educated. But I would say there's going to be an economic collapse. Things are going to get very ugly. We don't know when. There's no crystal ball to say, well, that's going to happen next year or 15 years from now. We don't know that. But it's not sustainable.
Yeah. So we've been going for about 45 minutes. Maybe we'll ask one or two more questions, and then I think we probably should take a break.
My question is for Matt. The last question about Yaletown versus Chilliwack, I don't really think you even answered it. Nobody was talking about the size of the home or the quality and the amount of cars. It's just geographically, how do you decide where you're going to live? If I have a place that I've decided I like to live, I like the people that surround me there, I like the view, but I don't own that piece of property that I live on, who decides how long I can stay there, why I'm staying there, do I deserve to stay there, and if not, where am I told to leave once my time is up?
It's not a matter of who decides, it's simply is it available. And homes, there's so many terrible homes that exist today, and no one would want to live there if they didn't have to, if they weren't subjected to monetary constraints. In a resource-based economy, we could easily design housing that's extremely high caliber all over the world. There wouldn't be this distinction between, okay, this is a crappy house and this is a great house.
Who's we? You say a lot of we. there's a lot of we as if it's everybody. Is this individuals, and why are the individuals doing this? Is it because they've been told to do it by other we's, or I don't know.
No, it has nothing to do with that. Remember, this isn't a coercive system dictated by the government. It's not dictated by the market. It's simply dictated by what technology can provide for us. So that's we in the sense of we have to decide that we want this sort of social arrangement to bring the fruits to as many people as technically possible. That's what I mean by we.
Yeah, just to if I can counsel that as well, like the ominous we, like I know what the concerns are, and they're legitimate concerns, I think, like the whole thing of checks and balances, like the powers that be, that where people, it's said to be decentralized and centralized. You have like your local hubs, and then you have a global, more encompassing global, or what's it called?
Well, I mean, it's centralized only in the sense that we keep track of data on a comprehensive global basis. So it's a systems approach. It's an engineering concept. There's nothing centralized, as in Soviet-style Russia, where people are gathering around a round table deciding everything. It's centralized only to the extent that we take into account data from all over the world. That's the only way to be sustainable.
But it is a concentration of power into a small cadre of human beings who are said to be just following the scientific method model.
No, it's not a small concentration of power. And also another thing needs to be understood. Power is essentially a product of scarcity in the monetary system. If it's in your best interest to uphold a system that's designed to maximize your needs, then there's no clash of motives, as there is in the market system, where people are pursuing their own detached, conflicting self-interests often. Whereas in the resource-based economy, it's in your best interest to uphold a system that's that's essentially designed to look after all your needs. There's no corrupting mechanism in that sense. In the market system, the whole thing is based on corrupt incentives.
All right, let's get one last question in.
A slightly lighter question. In terms of the education system, in like a minute or less, what would it look like? I know it's not a lot of time, but I mean, just, there's a lot of flaws with it right now, obviously. The fact that we're on one of the biggest campuses, around, and that's sort of what online courses are showing people, is that it's just a place, right? It's just real estate. What do you guys think of the education system?
Touch on this a bit, I guess,
I think I said enough then, Mike. The current educational system?
What would you change? Like, what does it look like in anarcho-capitalism?
Are you talking about like state mandated compulsory indoctrination?
Sure.
Well, the abolishment
yeah.
I get more nitty-gritty than that. So I'd say let's look at what actually maximizes learning and education. Again, Alfie Cohen's written numerous books on the subject. You have to question the use of competition in classrooms. In fact, the only reason we argue that we have grades is to sort people out into different talents, which prepares them for the market system. We actually shows that studies actually show that education flourishes absent the use of grades and also standardized testing. Much can be said about this. I recommend, there's a good lecture by Alfie Cohen called No Homework Plus No Grades Equal Better Learning, and he summarizes the material a lot better than I could in 1 minute.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Like, that's just to speak in the negative, the abolishment of public schooling. But in terms of the positive, there's different schools of thought in that, even like the Montessori system. That's highly touted, It's something that I get a great deal of thought of, There's also like homeschooling, and letting the child be and gravitate towards their own natural inclinations of what they're interested in. They are the very first scientists, when they're born, they're taking in the mass of data as infants, and they're processing and they're learning, and they're on their way to being little miniature scientists, So the flourishing of the human mind is something that's already natural. I don't think that if you left, the whole thing about the public schooling is that if we don't send them there due to negligent parents, we would have kids be able to read or write, but I think that's making those connections is very natural to the child, and I think public schooling has only been hammering towards those natural inclinations to learning.
All right, I think that'll do it for the audience Q&A section. Thank you everyone for your questions. Yeah. All right, so I think that'll conclude our event today. Thanks again so much for coming. Really appreciate the support and interest. And maybe if we got some good feedback, we can maybe do something like this again if there's enough interest. So thanks again, guys. And,